On the night of June 25, 1872, the last train had left the Hoosac Tunnel in western Massachusetts. And it was now safe for the railroad inspectors who needed to check the track. The men had traveled about 2 miles into the tunnel when they heard a strange, mournful sound and saw a dim glow. At first, they thought it was a workman with a lantern. Later, the 2 men swore they had seen a ghost. Ghost sightings in the Hoosac were not uncommon. In the 20 years it had taken to build this railroad tunnel, 200 workmen died, most of them crushed by the hard rock of Hoosac Mountain. And legends of their trapped spirits would be told for years afterward. Back then, it was not a surprise that a tunnel would claim so many lives. Burrowing through the earth had always been dangerous, and deaths were the rule, not the exception. Today, it's a lot safer to build or be in a tunnel. But there is still something eerie, even sinister, about being underground.
The underground, throughout history, has been worrying, it's been alarming, it's been the place dangerous things have come from. The idea being rooted in human cultures, that it's another world.
For many of us, the best part of a tunnel will always be the light at the end of it. Yet as life above ground grows increasingly congested, tunnels have become practical necessities, providing some of the last available avenues for cars and trains, water and sewage, even power and communication lines.
Tunnels are some of the oldest and magnificent structures, without which today, I think civilization as we know it couldn't exist.
Throughout history, tunnels have served as invisible markers to the relentless advance of civilization. We're going down under the city of Boston to catch a glimpse of some of the human moles who build our tunnels. We used to tunnel to get through mountains and under rivers. Now we build tunnels to get under our crowded, congested cities. Boston is undertaking one of the biggest tunneling projects in history to ease congestion on its old and narrow streets. This is only one of many tunnels being built here. Although there are hard hats and safety lights and lots of labor-saving equipment, the work still seems hard, dirty, and dangerous.
I like dirt. I like dirt ever since I was a kid.
It's like being a bat. Being in the dark all day and you come up after work and the sun's out and you can't believe it.
These workers are using a machine called a road header to dig out the earth and rock beneath one of Boston's railroad stations. Depending on conditions down here, they might use explosives or pneumatic drills or even giant tunnel boring machines. I'm standing in a precast section of tunnel that's actually going to be slid into place under the railway tracks. It's kept online with its own laser guidance system. Boston's expanding network of tunnels will literally reinvent downtown, converting a highway into parkland and reconnecting the city with its historic waterfront. Today, what is known as Boston's Big Dig is still a big mess. But one day soon, tunnels will transform this landscape, just as they once did in the greatest city of the ancient world. This is a model of Rome in about 200 AD, a city of over 1 million people. At a glance, it's obvious what the Romans valued most: grand buildings for public functions, roads and bridges for transportation, and aqueducts for supplying fresh water. The aqueduct is the covered stone trough that rests on top of the arches. It usually begins its journey from mountain springs miles outside the city. As long as the aqueduct sloped downhill, gravity carried the water on its way. But sometimes mountains blocked the route, forcing the aqueduct to go underground, like a tunnel. Remarkably, one of Rome's earliest underground aqueducts is still in use today. It is the Aqua Virgina, which supplies water to the famous Trevi fountain. In ancient Rome, people collected their drinking water here. Water systems were so important to Roman city planners, their engineers eventually created the most extensive supply network in the ancient world. And this would include tunnels not only to bring fresh water in, but to take wastewater out. The enormous Cloaca Maxima was one of Rome's earliest sewers and is still in use today. It was so huge and impressive, the Emperor Augustus was rumored to have toured it in a ship. To create such colossal structures required a workforce ready to perform hard labor. Fortunately for the Romans, they had plenty of slaves. Tunneling was both tedious and dangerous. Slaves had only hand tools to chip away the hard rock, which could collapse on them at any moment. And when builders wanted to speed things up, they resorted to a technique called fire setting. The rock was heated by a fierce fire, then suddenly cooled by dashing it with cold water. The temperature change caused the rock to split, making it easier to excavate. But the tunnel became a raging inferno.
Just imagine in a confined place setting up fire with all the smoke, then pouring water on a hot surface which created steam, fumes, as well as a lot of toxic gases. Yet, this method was used as a standard method for over 2,000 years.
Fire setting was much faster than tunneling only with chisels and hammers, but the process killed hundreds, perhaps even thousands of slaves. When the Roman Empire finally collapsed, its great cities fell into ruin. The heirs of the empire had neither the will nor the slaves to continue building tunnels on such a massive scale. But over the centuries, wherever tunnels were built, virtually all of them followed one of Roman engineering's most fundamental designs.
One of the in the shape of an arch, like Paw Paw here in Maryland. Engineers build this way because the arch shape, with a little help, takes the weight from above and actually redirects it around the sides of the open passage to the ground below. Now that help comes from the mountain itself. Let me show you how. Normally when you push down on the top of the arch, the sides bow outward. The whole thing can collapse. The weight of the mountain pushes back, counteracting that thrust, stabilizing the arch. This works just fine if you're tunneling through firm, solid rock, but if it's filled with cracks and fissures, it'll crumble the moment you try to cut into it. So when engineers confront weak rock, they have to build their own arched passageway called a lining to keep the tunnel from collapsing.
At Paw Paw, they lined the tunnel with brick. Modern tunnels mostly use steel and precast concrete. The lining not only helps to support the opening, it protects the passageway from falling dirt and debris and dripping water.
The Paw Paw is 150 years old, and though the brick is a little old and crusty, it still works pretty well. When it was completed, this was one of the longest canal tunnels in America.
I think at the time that the canals were at their prime, if you were a tough chap, you were quite prepared to lie on your back and use your legs to push a canal boat through a tunnel, bearing in mind that the rest of the time you would have a horse to do the job for you. It was a tough thing to do.
Canals successfully carried the fruits of the Industrial Revolution well into the 19th century. But ambitious men quickly lost patience with such a slow means of transportation. Soon, canals would be overwhelmed by the faster and more efficient railways.